So hi, everybody, and welcome to the PBAS monthly program. I'm excited to be here with you all here today and with October, our speaker. Woo-woo! So before I introduce October and before she gets going, just going to do a few announcements like normal, tell you a few of the PBAS goings-ons. So first of all, thank you, everybody that contributed to our annual appeal. We not only met, but we actually exceeded a bit our goal of $75,000. So thank you so much. This is what allows us to have all of these free and low-cost programs to connect our community with each other and with nature. So thank you again. It's been an exciting few weeks here at PBAS. So just in the start of March, we welcomed our new crew of AmeriCorps. So starting from the left, that is Celine and Maggie and Ethan. So now we have two Ethans. We just said goodbye to two Madelines, and now we have two Ethans. So those three are environmental educators. So they've been busy learning all the stuff, getting used to our preserves, and some of them are local. Celine and Maggie are pretty local. Ethan came to us from Rochester, New York. So getting used to a different ecosystem a little bit. So Mason, there on the far right, Mason is our conservation and land management AmeriCorps. So we'll be getting going pretty soon with some volunteer work days and other stuff that Mason is going to be coordinating a lot for. So very excited to have them all on board and joining the whole team. So right now we have 7 environmental educators. And on Monday, we're going to have a training for watershed field trips because we are just about to dive into the very, very busy field trip season. Just around the corner as well is Race for the Birds. So you can still sign up for it. You can sign up for it as a participant. You can sign up for it to volunteer in a number of ways. There's also a few special walks beforehand, like a special wellness walk and a special bird walk. So we hope to see you there. It's always a big, exciting, fun event. And the planning team is definitely at work adding some extra exciting elements this year. So it's going to be super cool. Another thing that's new and exciting happening right now, you may have met Erin Smaldone, who is doing some work with us helping to develop our volunteer program. And as part of that, we are going to have a volunteer orientation next Saturday. So Saturday, the 22nd at Cold Spring Preserve. So that's an opportunity for people to come by and learn about the breadth of PBAS volunteer opportunities to find what their niche might be, right? How they might want to get involved. So immediately after this as well, Master Naturalist Roy Boyle is going to lead a special hike, it's around the spring solstice, but the trees are still very much wintry. So it's a winter tree identification hike. So lots of stuff about, the buds and identifying trees in that way. Finally, I want to tell you about next month's monthly program. So April 17th, so it's not the normal second Thursday. We didn't get the room for that day, but it's the third Thursday, so April 17th. And her Pettiford is going to be speaking, and the topic is forest stewardship management plans, how they can support healthy forests. So a little more specifically, he recently developed a forest management plan for Piedmont. And so he's going to be sharing about that. And then that same weekend, so shortly after that, he's going to be leading a walk in the forest at Piedmont, showing some forestry practices and talking more about the plan itself. So I hope to see you there for that. Finally, I'm just opening this so I can get October's bio and introduce her properly. So October Greenfield is the Wildlife Habitat Program Manager for the Piedmont Environmental Council and co-coordinator of the Virginia Grassland Bird Initiative. Her work includes a diverse portfolio of wildlife habitat restoration projects, leading community-based conservation efforts and promoting landowner engagement around habitat management. She has worked with raptors for a decade and is a licensed raptor bander. In 2018, October served as one of PBS's AmeriCorps environmental educators. So I'm meeting you for the first time, but so happy to have you back.
Yeah. Okay, hi everyone. I hope you're all here to learn about kestrels. If you are not here for that, I don't know where you're supposed to be, but you're welcome to stay anyway. So as Sonia said, I have been working with raptors, including kestrels, for just over a decade now. And I'll start out our presentation. I'll tell you a little bit about myself as well as the organization I work for and the Virginia Grassland Bird Initiative. And then we'll get into some kestrel ecology. And then I'll talk a little bit more specifically about the nest box program that I help manage. Maybe. How does this work? Put the screen once. Okay, great. So hi, this is me. As Sonia said, I work for the Piedmont Environmental Council. It's a nonprofit land trust based in Warrenton, Virginia. I started there in 2021, so going on 4 years now, and I'm the Wildlife Habitat Program Manager. So I manage a property that PEC actually owns called the Piedmont Memorial Overlook, which is right near Sky Meadows State Park in Delaplane, Virginia, or Paris, Virginia. And then I'm also the co-coordinator of the Virginia Grassland Bird Initiative that maybe some of you are familiar with, but we work with several other nonprofit organizations through this initiative to help support bird-friendly practices on working lands. So PEC's mission is to protect and restore the lands and waters of the Virginia Piedmont while building stronger, more sustainable communities. Our mission is such because the Virginia Piedmont is our home. I'm actually not from Virginia, but I definitely consider this area to be my home now. I've been in Virginia almost 8 years now, and I really can't imagine being anywhere else. We value the broad experiences, opinions, and motivations of the diverse communities in this region, as well as the collaboration and partnerships that we have with many other organizations and agencies, and the power of community engagement. A big part of our work is empowering these local communities to have a say in how they want their communities to be. So we value a thoughtful and holistic approach to addressing the complex issues that are facing our lands and communities, whether that's development or invasive species. We value public access to nature. We own 2 properties that are publicly accessible 24/7, 365. One is in Fauquier County and one is in Loudoun County. We value a strong rural economy. If you've ever seen our bumper stickers out, they say farmland lost is farmland lost forever. And so we really value that rural economy and the livelihoods, that are supporting those working lands. We also value smart growth that respects our natural and cultural resources. We recognize, that growth is inevitable, but there are smarter ways to go about growth. And so we do a lot of work related to land use and policy. So the core area of PEC that I work under is conserving and restoring the Piedmont's lands and waters through the Grassland Bird Initiative. And then we also have a riparian buffer planting program where we offer plantings along streams, rivers, wetlands at no cost to landowners, creating stronger and more sustainable communities. And then our third focal area is shaping and advancing Virginia's transition to a clean energy future. The Piedmont Environmental Council serves 9 counties from Loudoun County all the way down to Albemarle. The Charlottesville area is a pretty big region. And so I'm based in our Warrenton office in Fauquier County, and then we also have an office down in Charlottesville that serves our southern counties. So the Virginia Grassland Bird Initiative that I co-coordinate, as I said, we work to support bird-friendly practices on working lands. This program is in partnership with a couple of other organizations, including the Smithsonian's Virginia Working Landscapes, American Farmland Trust, and Quail Forever. We launched this initiative in 2021, recognizing, that grassland birds have declined more than any other type of bird globally. A study in 2019 came out that showed that grassland birds have declined by over 50% in the last 5 decades. So we also recognize that there's a really unique opportunity here in Virginia for the conservation of grassland birds on our working lands. So this initiative was kind of born out of recognizing the need to help stem the tide of grassland bird decline, slow it down, stop it, maybe someday start to see it reverse and start to see these populations of grassland birds actually increase in the future. But we also recognize that we cannot do this work without the cooperation of landowners and farmers who are stewards of this land. So a big goal of this initiative is improving the resiliency of these working lands, improving water quality, air quality, soil health, as well as positively impacting the livelihoods that depend on these lands. We make land management recommendations to landowners and farmers often, but we recognize that the best management practices that we are promoting have to be sustainable for folks who make a living off the land in order for them to be willing to implement them. So here are the 4 organizations that make up the Grassland Bird Initiative. At PEC, it's myself, and then program assistant Laura McShane is based in our Charlottesville office. Some of you perhaps have heard Dr. Amy Johnson speak from Smithsonian's Virginia Working Landscapes about the biodiversity work that they do there. We also have Quail Forever, who's mostly based in the Shenandoah Valley and is fairly new to our initiative. Katie McVicker just started a little over a year ago and has really helped expand our reach in the Shenandoah Valley. And then American Farmland Trust is a very valuable add to our initiative that kind of gives us a direct in to a lot of the farmers in our region. So in addition to the 9 counties that I cover for PEC, I cover 7 extra counties through the Virginia Grassland Bird Initiative for a total of 16 counties in northwestern Virginia. So that includes the Piedmont and the Shenandoah Valley here. So we all do a lot of driving, but we get to see some really, really amazing private lands across this region. Okay, so with all that out of the way, I'm going to dive into the nest box monitoring and banding program that we have through the Virginia Grassland Bird Initiative. Somebody asked earlier if I would have a live kestrel tonight. I apologize that I don't, but you will get to see lots of cute pictures. So I just want to mention that all the birds that you see that are in the hand in this presentation are being handled and banded by trained professionals with the appropriate state and federal permits. We do work with a number of licensed banders as well as volunteers that help us monitor these boxes, but they get to go through a really fun training process to volunteer with us. So about American Kestrels, they're the smallest falcon in North America. They are roughly the size of a mourning dove. They're not very big. They're also our most colorful falcon. Some call them like a patriotic bird because the males are kind of red, white, and blue. Their diet is pretty varied. They eat a lot of insects like grasshoppers, dragonflies, cicadas, as well as lizards and skinks, small rodents like voles, and then other smaller birds. Folks who have really vested interest in bluebirds sometimes don't like to hear that, but they do sometimes eat smaller birds. They're really lightweight. They weigh about 110 to 140 grams. To put that into perspective, that's about the same weight as a D battery or a deck of cards. So they're not very big, but if you're, a grasshopper, as Kristen said earlier, that is a fierce predator coming for you. So kestrels are a grassland bird. They rely on open grassland habitats for their hunting habitat. They don't nest in the grasslands on the ground like some of our other grassland birds do, like eastern meadowlarks or grasshopper sparrows. They're what we call cavity nesters. So they historically nested in snags or standing dead trees with holes in them. Unfortunately, we just don't see as many of those structures out on the landscape anymore. Folks tend to cut them down or they fall down. And so what does remain of natural cavities, there's a lot of competition for them from other cavity nesting birds and flying squirrels and things like that. So they are losing their natural habitat a bit, and across North America, kestrels have declined by just about 50%. Kestrels are a little bit unique in that they are one of the few raptor species in this area where you can actually tell males and females apart by the color of their feathers or their plumage. So the female over there, their wings are this kind of chocolatey, rusty brown and black barred color, as well as their tail is barred or striped as well. And then our male has these kind of slate bluish gray wings. And then the tail is a solid rusty color with a black band and then a white band at the end. So they're actually pretty easy to tell males and females apart out in the field, as long as they're not backlit and you can actually see their color. Females are also quite a bit larger than the males, which is true for pretty much all raptor species. The females are almost always larger than the males. The only other raptor in this region that you can tell males and females apart by their color would be the northern harrier. But northern harriers, the males turn gray in their second year. Kestrels are pretty unique in that as soon as the babies start to grow in their adult feathers at about 14 days old, we can already tell if they're male or female. So that's pretty cool. So what does their habitat look like? They like really wide open expanses of grassland habitats. So you'll often see them hunting or hovering over hay fields. They often are found if you're driving, along back roads or country roads on the power lines. They really like to sit on the power lines and look down underneath them for things to eat. So this is one example of really great kestrel habitat. They would love to sit on that snag in the middle of the field to be able to hunt from. They also really like pastures, cattle pastures, horse pastures. We find, the highest occupancy of nest boxes, the highest success often near or in cattle pastures. Research that's coming out from some of our partners in Virginia suggests that perhaps it is related to cattle grazing down the vegetation height. As I mentioned, they only weigh about 110 to 140 grams. So when they come down and land on top of vegetation, there's not a lot of weight to get down into tall grasses. So it could be partially because the grass is grazed down fairly low. Looking at their diet suggests that they might also be attracted to cattle pastures because of the insects. Possibly insects that are attracted to the cow patties, like dung beetles and things like that, that are easier prey for them, and just easier for them to see small mammals and things like that that they're hunting in cattle pastures. So we have a lot of nest boxes in pastures like this. And then native meadows are great habitat as well, especially because of the insect biodiversity that you find in a native meadow like this. This is actually the meadow that PEC owns and that I manage, the Piedmont Memorial Overlook here. We have several nest boxes in this region. It is a little bit harder possibly for them to hunt in these tall meadows, as I mentioned, but I think there's a big trade-off in just the biodiversity that exists in a native meadow like this versus non-native cool season grasses that you might find in a pasture. So what does their nesting cycle look like? So we are, this is about the time of year that they are starting to stake out nesting territory, possibly even starting to lay eggs as early as mid-March. So we generally consider the nesting season from about mid-March until about mid-July or so. Typically, the female will lay 5 eggs. That's most common, although we have seen anywhere from 3 eggs to 8 eggs. But 5 or 6 is generally what we see in a nest. They will incubate or sit on their eggs and keep them warm for just about a month. And then the nestlings will stay in the nest for about another month. So once they are incubating their eggs, it's about a 2-month process before the babies are able to leave the nest. Kestrels are what we consider synchronous hatchers. That means that their eggs generally all hatch at about the same time, maybe a day or two in between the age of the babies once they've hatched. So kestrels actually don't start incubating their eggs until they have laid about 4 or so of them, and then they'll lay 1 or 2 more. And so they'll generally all hatch within a day or 2 of each other. There are other species that we work with, such as the barn owl, who are famously asynchronous hatchers. So you can see up to a 2-week age difference of babies in the same nest. Different strategies for survival. This is kind of the progression of what that nesting cycle looks like. They have these very pretty kind of peachy colored eggs with rusty spots on them. And then once they hatch, they're the cutest little cotton balls, so sweet. And then kind of not so sweet. They get kind of crusty and gross looking, and they smell not great. But then by the time they're a month old, they are pretty much full size. Their tail's a little shorter than an adult, but you can see this guy has a little bit of down fluffs still on his head, but he otherwise has pretty much his adult feathers. And by the time they're about 30 days old, they can leave the nest and start learning how to fly, learning how to hunt for themselves. So what are nest boxes and why do we use them? If you're not familiar with the term nest box, you might be familiar with the term birdhouse or bird box. Same thing. They are human-made enclosures that we provide for different species to nest in. So kestrels use them, bluebirds, purple martins, barn owls, flying squirrels will even use them, or fox squirrels will sometimes steal our kestrel boxes for us. That is not fun to open a box up when there's a squirrel inside of it. But we're seeing them kind of being installed across the landscape more and more. I think partially, due to development and urban growth, partially due to habitat loss and increased agriculture on the landscape. But I also think, especially because of the pandemic, folks are just more interested in what is going on in their backyards and have taken a really increased interest in the birds in their backyards. And so nest boxes for any species are a really cool way to kind of get to see that cycle of life happen in your own backyard. If you don't have kestrel habitat, you can put up, bluebird boxes will nest in just about any kind of habitat. And, even if you only have a small backyard, you can still attract something with a nest box. So it's just a really fun way to kind of get involved in conservation and get to see that kind of play out at home. So this is what it looks like when we install them on the landscape. We always have some sort of door that opens, not only so we can access the birds for banding and research purposes, but we also clean out the boxes at the end of the season. So you need to be able to dump all the gunk and stuff that's in there out of the box, generally on an annual basis. We also use 2 different types of predator guards. So that's that long metal piece that you see, that's what we call a stovepipe baffle. And then on top of it is hardware cloth or like a wire mesh. This is pretty good at preventing things like snakes or raccoons from being able to get in the boxes. Nothing is ever 100% foolproof, but these 2 things in conjunction with each other do a pretty good job at keeping predators out. And then we generally attach them to a fence post or some kind of post that we sink into the ground. We generally do not recommend attaching them to trees just because the risk of predators being able to get to them either from above or below is really increased. So we like to have them kind of freestanding away from trees whenever possible. So why are we monitoring boxes? Well, we have the opportunity to learn a lot about kestrels and other species from monitoring nest boxes. We can keep track of nesting success in individual boxes as well as across the landscape. And that helps us kind of look at population trends over time. Are their populations increasing or decreasing across the region? We are also able to track individual movements and survival through our banding program. If you're not familiar with bird banding, it generally involves putting a little metal band, like a bracelet, around their leg, and it has an individual unique number code on it. so that if somebody ever sees or captures that bird again, that number is associated with that individual. And so then we can learn where it was initially banded, how far it's traveled, how long it lives. But there's no GPS tracking or anything like that inside of a band. That could be a whole other presentation, GPS tracking of birds. But so it is a passive form of monitoring. Someone would generally have to encounter that bird again to be able to get that information. And then through monitoring, we also get to learn a lot about their habitat preferences, what types of habitat are preferred, where we put up nest boxes. As we're learning, they really like cattle pastures. And then food preferences as well. You can see these little guys, mom or dad brought them a nice juicy skink for lunch. We find all sorts of weird things in the boxes. A few years ago when we had the big cicada brood hatch, these boxes were like stuffed full of cicada wings all the time. So they definitely took advantage of that year. This is another reason why we monitor boxes. So a subset of our boxes actually have cameras installed in them, so we can remotely monitor them. And this is one example of a really, really, really big snake that was able to get around the predator guard system we had installed and was able to get inside that box. This is just a screenshot of the video because the video is not very fun to actually watch. But so this nest failed, obviously. And so that's something that we were able to kind of alter the predator guard system that we had up the next season for this fox, because snakes are pretty smart and they kind of know where they get food from. So we wanted to make sure that this didn't happen again in this box. But we do learn about predation, especially in these boxes that we have remote cameras monitoring them. We've seen little raccoon hands reach in through the nest box hole. We had one where the kestrels had not started nesting yet, and a little raccoon reached its arm in the box, and then the next day they laid their first egg of the season. So they got lucky with that one. We've also observed something we didn't expect is that woodpeckers are predators of kestrel eggs. They will go in the box and steal the eggs and presumably crack them open and eat what's inside. Pretty much everyone in nature likes an egg. It's a good food source, but that was very interesting to learn. I don't think any of us expected that we would see several different species of woodpeckers go in and steal eggs out of the nest boxes. And that's a predator that we can't really prevent from getting into the boxes because most of the woodpeckers are smaller than kestrels, so they can get in through the entrance hole. So there's really no way to prevent that one. So how do we monitor the boxes? We use an app called Nest Watch by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. I'm sure some of you are familiar with the Merlin app that you can learn bird songs through. That's also a Cornell Lab of Ornithology app, so kind of similar citizen science kind of project here. So we use this to keep track of all the nest box locations that we have. We actually have over 500 of them now. And then we can also kind of keep track of every time we visit a nest to see, when do they start laying eggs? How many eggs have they laid? What's the hatch date? And then we can also keep track of when we visit to do banding and things like that. So this is just an example of what it looks like when you open up that app. And these are some of our nest boxes near the Sky Meadows State Park area. We also have some barn owl nest boxes in our app as well, but this is not publicly available data. NestWatch was kind of not created to be intended to use this way where you're monitoring like 500 boxes. It was kind of more intended for like monitoring a robin's nest in your backyard kind of thing. But it works really well for us, and so we've run with it. And unfortunately, it's kind of like one shared account that all of us that monitor boxes have to use, but we do have some barn owl boxes in there as well. So what does the actual process of monitoring look like? Well, most of these boxes are installed about 8 to 10 feet high, except my boxes at Sky Meadows State Park, which are like 15 feet high, which is not that fun. But we monitor most of our boxes with a camera on a big extendable like painter's pole. And then that camera will connect to your smartphone, either through Wi-Fi or Bluetooth. So you can pop the camera into the box and then see a live view right on your phone. So it's not very disruptive to the nest at all. Before we started using this system, like 8 or so years ago, we would actually have to climb a ladder and open up every box, not knowing what's inside. And my first day out in the field doing this, we opened up a box with a big rat snake in it. And I said, no way am I climbing up one of those ladders and opening a box blind. So about 2 years after that, we started using this camera system, which makes it much easier and much less involved to monitor the boxes. And so when we stick the camera in, there's just in a couple of examples of what we might see. That bottom circle is a female sitting on eggs, and we were actually able to see she's already banded. So someone at some point has already trapped this bird. So when we pull her out of the box, we can actually learn who banded her, when they banded her, and where. Sometimes we'll find eggs in there. The top circle is an example of 5 nestlings in there that are probably about 18 days old or so. Once they get about that big, it gets a little cramped in there, and they're not very clean. They poop all over each other, and it's just smelly and gross in there. And they don't, at this stage, they just don't look very cute. They're kind of crusty and gross looking, but just an example of what we might see. Sometimes we find other birds nesting in these. Any native bird is left alone, that they get the box for the season. So sometimes we'll see bluebirds in there or woodpecker species nesting in there. If there's a squirrel in there, we generally will not mess with the squirrel. They will stuff these boxes all the way up to the top with leaves in them. But if we have European starlings in the box, those are not a native species, they're invasive. And they are kind of the biggest competitor of kestrel boxes. Since they are not native, they are not protected, and so we evict starling nests so that kestrels have the opportunity to come back and use the box if they would like to. So the banding process, if we find somebody inside of the box, involves climbing up a ladder, so can't be too afraid of heights. Most of the boxes are only 8 to 10 feet high, so it's not too bad. But the ones that are 15 feet or so are not quite as fun. But you climb up a ladder, you open up the access door. If it's an adult in there that is incubating their eggs, once they have been incubating for about a week, we can actually pull the adults out of the boxes. We keep the camera inside the hole, so they're kind of trapped in there. And once they've been incubating for about a week, they're pretty invested. And so the chances of them abandoning their nest because of the banding process is extremely minimal. So if it's an adult, we can generally just reach in and pluck them up off their eggs. If it's babies, we will put them into what I call the baby bucket, which is a 5-gallon bucket with a towel in the bottom of it. And then it gets passed down to the ground to be able to band them and take some measurements. So here's an example of an adult that we pull out of the box that already has a band. So we can read that number off, write it down. We will later submit that information to the bird banding lab, which is managed by the U.S. Geological Survey. So we'll submit some data to them, and then they will send us back a report that tells us who banded the bird and when and where. And then we also get an opportunity to actually connect with the bander if it was not one of our birds. So we'll actually get like an email address so we can say, hey, we trapped your bird, and now she lives here. We've had some really cool data of movements. Last year, we trapped a male in the Shenandoah Valley who was actually banded as a nestling in Pennsylvania, which was our farthest distance that we had recorded in the project so far. But we occasionally get birds like from Maryland or other parts of Virginia as well. If the adult is not yet banded or we're doing babies, we will band them. That involves using a specialized pair of pliers called banding pliers. But they come in different sizes so that they are kind of the right size for the leg of that bird. So they have holes in them, so you can clamp it right around their leg and it doesn't hurt them at all. And then we will also weigh them. Because we were doing photos this day, I weighed him in a little clear cup. but kestrels actually fit perfectly inside of Pringles cans. So we usually weigh them inside of Pringles cans. We're also able to look at whether they're male or female. Pop quiz, is this a male or a female down here? Male. That's a male, that's right. And then so we're recording all of this data. We also take some measurements. So we take the length of the wing, the length of the tail, and the length of the tarsus, which is equivalent on me would be like from the top of my wrist to my elbow on their leg. Why do we take all these measurements? It's mainly, we're already handling the birds, so we kind of try to collect as much data as we can. And these measurements for kestrels, generally, we're looking at long-term data sets. So there is some research coming out that shows over decades and decades and decades that birds might actually be getting smaller over time. So we're not looking at these measurements year to year. This is a long-term kind of possibility that we might see something with this data someday. And while we're already handling the bird, we might as well collect it. Some species, when the male and the female look the same and you can't necessarily easily tell them apart, sometimes taking these measurements like the length of their wing and their weight will actually help you be able to tell whether they're male or female, but we don't have to worry about that with the kestrels. So just for fun, I wanted to show you some of the raptor handling techniques that we use. Way down on the end there, that is not a kestrel. Does anybody know what that is? That's a barn owl, yeah. So that is what we call a basic leg grip. So basically, you stick your index finger in between their legs and then make a fist. I generally don't use this method on kestrels because they're so small that you don't really need to, but for our larger raptors, that's generally how we handle them. A photographer's grip is next, aptly called because that's generally how we hold them to take photos of them, because we're not obstructing kind of any of their wings or their tails. The ice cream cone grip, that is the real term. If you look in a wildlife techniques book, they will call that the ice cream cone grip. They're just the perfect little ice cream cone size. That basically just, you're holding their legs and their wings all together so they kind of can't move around. And then this is Bander's grip. So basically their head goes between your index and your middle fingers and you kind of make a fist around that. And because kestrels are so small, you can generally easily be able to hold their foot in there as well. We don't ban larger raptors in this grip, but they use it for things like songbirds. So just for fun, kind of some of the ways that we handle raptors and kestrels. Someone asked me earlier about wearing gloves. As you can see, I'm not wearing gloves in any of these photos. It's actually for kestrels. They're not very big. They can't hurt you that bad. If I pull an adult out of a nest box, generally because you're kind of reaching in blind, I will wear like a light leather glove. But sometimes they will flip over and be talons up. So I will wear a glove to pull an adult out of a box, but then once you have them in the hand, you generally have all of the pointy weapon parts of them under control. So gloves are not really needed, and you actually are able to kind of better handle and feel things without gloves. So once we have raptors in the hand under control, we generally don't use gloves, even for larger raptors like barn owls or red-tailed hawks or things like that. I think so the Virginia Grassland Bird Initiative, our nest box program, that's kind of an overview of what we do and why. But we also offer some services to landowners related to nest boxes. We can provide kind of personalized advice based on a landowner's property of which species would benefit from nest boxes, based on the habitat they have there, as well as best locations and best advice on where to place those boxes so they're most likely to get occupied. And then we can also provide options for either where to purchase boxes or, if you Google nest boxes, all sorts of things will come up. So we can kind of provide advice on which boxes are best, which styles of boxes are best. Or we can provide blueprints for folks who are handy and would like to try to build their own boxes. We have also worked with some local high schools who have built us kestrel boxes. And so at times we have had nest boxes that we're able to provide to landowners at no cost. So we can just do a site visit and put the box right up for them, and then it kind of gets absorbed into our monitoring program. High schools have built us probably in the ballpark of about 60 boxes in the last year and a half that we've put up on private properties across the landscape. We're now kind of focusing more on bluebird boxes for schools to build us because, as I mentioned, we have like 500 Kestrel boxes in our network. And it's getting a little tough for us to monitor all of them every year. So bluebird boxes are a little bit easier for volunteers and other people to monitor. So we're kind of starting to shift to that to work with students. And with that, I can take any questions. Yeah.
How bad is their bite?
The question was, how bad is their bite? Well, they're predators, and somehow they know to go for, like, they know where the soft spots on your hands are. They go for your cuticles. I got bit like on the webbing between my index and thumb one time that didn't feel very good. So they can draw a little bit of blood, but I mean, you're not going to need to like get stitches or like go to the hospital over it or anything like that.
You mentioned their talent.
Yeah.
I guess you're concerned about getting injured by their talent. So what happens there? Just the sharpness of it?
Yeah, the question was, what is the concern about their talents? For kestrels, it's not really, I mean, it doesn't hurt that bad. It's just generally it's not as bad as like getting scratched by a cat. It's less bad than that. But because we do so many of them through the season, we all end up with scratches and bite marks. And so we generally, when we're handling the adults, because the adults are much stronger than the nestlings often have not yet realized that they are equipped with weapons on both ends. So yeah, the adults are much more likely to bite and like grab on. So that's why we use a glove when we pull an adult out. Some folks that I've worked with don't even, I mean, if they have stronger, more calloused hands than me, maybe they don't even feel a need to wear a glove to pull a kestrel out. But larger birds like a red-tailed hawk or something, those talons and that beak can do some damage. So we generally will wear gloves until we have a bird like under control in the hand for larger birds like that.
Worry about any kind of infection or any kind of biting?
Do we worry about any kind of infection? Well, we use a lot of hand sanitizer. I sanitize my hands in between every box, and there's also concern of spreading disease between boxes, especially with the bird flu. Our kind of process generally involves hand sanitizer and sterilization between different nests. So the worst I've ever had is like blood blisters that take a couple, and honestly, usually I'm more likely to hurt myself with the pliers than I am to have a bird hurt me. So yeah.
If you baby, how does it not get too tight on them?
Great question. Yeah, the question was when we band the babies, how does the band not get too tight on their legs? So birds are funny in that they kind of grow feet and legs first. And so when they're really little, they like kind of can't even stand themselves up yet. And their feet and their legs look huge. So the babies, by the time they are about 10 to 14 days old, their legs are full size. So we don't band until they are at least 10 days old. We generally prefer to wait until 14 because that's when we can tell if they're male or female. But once they're, 10 days to 2 weeks old, we don't have to worry at all about the band ever getting too tight. Banding before that age, the concern would actually be the band slipping down over their foot and getting stuck on their foot. So that's why we wait until they're about 10 days old. But yeah, they kind of grow legs and feet first, and that kind of reaches full size first. Yeah.
What's a typical life expectancy of these birds?
What is the typical life expectancy of these birds? That's a great question. I think in the wild, we generally think maybe 5 years or so. I mean, first year of life for pretty much anything out in the wild is the hardest. So if they make it through year 1, they have a pretty good shot at year 2 generally. I think the oldest bird that I have recaptured that was already banded was a male that was 7, and we were all like, whoa, he's so old, he's like a grandpa. And he probably was a great grandpa. But yeah, we think probably around 5 or so is maybe average in the wild. Yeah.
Is there a place where you can find out what size hole to put in a box for a specific type of bird?
Yeah, the question was,
That'd be different.
is there a place that you can find out what size of hole to put in a box for different species? Yes, the Cornell Lab of Ornithology has a very extensive website on nest box recommendations for all sorts of species. And they will recommend, I believe they have some blueprints, but they will also recommend the size of the hole, how high you should install the box, which orientation the opening should face. So yeah, if you Googled like Kestrel box dimensions, I'm betting the Cornell website would be like the first thing that comes up, probably, that would have that information, not only for Kestrels, but for pretty much any kind of nest box you could imagine. Yeah.
The photo with baby birds and the skink.
Yeah.
It just looked like, what are we supposed to do with it?
I know, yeah. That was a pretty big, the comment was the photo of the nestlings with the skink in the box. They kind of look like, what are we supposed to do with this? That's a pretty big meal for those little guys. Yeah.
Do they have to teach them to hunt or teach them what to eat?
Do they teach them what to hunt or what to eat? So when they first fledge from the box, they will kind of hang out in the area and be super annoying teenagers, like begging mom and dad, like, we're starving, please come feed us. So mom and dad will feed them a little bit until they get maybe too annoyed and they're like, go figure it out yourself. You're not going to starve to death if you figure it out. So mom and dad will kind of support them a little bit when they first leave the box, but they generally have to start figuring it out pretty quickly. Yeah. Yeah, in the back.
The hand.
Yeah.
Okay. When I was growing up, I was always told never touch the baby bird.
Yeah.
because the parents wouldn't come back. Is that not true?
Yeah, so the question was, I think a lot of us were told as children that you should never touch a baby bird because the parents will then reject it. And is that true or not? And that is not true. That is a white lie that we tell to children so that they keep their hands off of things they shouldn't have their hands on. Birds will not abandon their nest if you have touched the baby. It's generally kind of a white lie that is told because they'll say your scent is on the birds. Most birds actually can't smell. So most birds would generally probably not ever know that you handled their babies. I assume, when we band babies, if mom and dad are not in the immediate area, which sometimes they are and sometimes they will chatter at us, they probably come back to the box and they're like, where did you guys get all this jewelry from? Like, how did this happen? But yeah, the myth that your scent being on a baby bird will cause the parents to abandon them. Most birds cannot smell, so no worry about that.
Other hawks have that hovering habit that makes these so easily recognizable. when
Yeah.
you see them in the field.
Yeah, the question was, kestrels, when they hunt, you often see them hovering over the fields, which is called kiting. And are there any other species that do this? You might see others do it a little bit, but not as much as kestrels. I think there are some species, some non-North American species that do it a lot too. Yeah, but in this area, I really only see larger raptors doing it if it's really, really windy and they're able to kind of fly headfirst into a strong wind and kind of hover that way. But kestrels are super recognizable when you see them kiting or hovering over a field. Yeah.
I'm not sure if you already said this, but are these considered endangered?
Yeah, the question was, are kestrels considered endangered? They're not considered endangered. They haven't declined that much. In some areas, maybe you could even still consider them common, even though they have declined a lot. But they're not an endangered species in Virginia or West Virginia, and we would very much like to keep it that way. Yeah.
Relative to other raptors, what is the typical population in your area? Compared to red-tailed hawks or other birds of prey?
Yeah, the question was, compared to other birds of prey in the region, what are their populations like compared to like a red-tailed hawk or anything like that? I think it's hard to say. A lot of our population data comes from surveys like breeding bird surveys or even like eBird data. And so we are not directly looking at nesting success of other species except for barn owls in the Virginia Grassland Bird Initiative. I think there are some species of raptors that are doing pretty well. Barred owls, for example, their range has spread west, and they generally do pretty well adapting to suburban, urban-ish areas. Whereas kestrels, they wouldn't adapt well to that because they need wide open grasslands. So it's a little hard to directly compare population numbers in this region. But generally, there are some raptor species too that populations in the last few decades have increased, like bald eagles, because of the ban of DDT and chemicals like that. I mean, bald eagles almost went extinct. And I hear from folks all the time that, you know, it used to be a shock anytime you saw a bald eagle, and now I see them all the time just driving around. So some of our raptor populations are generally increasing from the past few decades. Historically, of course, they're probably still lower than what they once were, but yeah, a lot of our bird species in this region are generally declining. One group that is actually increasing kind of globally is waterfowl because of wetland protections.
Do they have a territory? Because you tend to see, you know, a kestrel in the same area.
Yeah.
And you look for it because you know it's the Piedmont kestrel or this kestrel, yeah. And
Yep.
they also, when you go by, they'll lift up and fly up, then land again, and then you get to that spot, then they'll do the same.
Yeah. Yeah, the question was about their territories and how we often will see kestrels kind of in the same area, and you might think of them as like you identify them by the place that you often see them. So some of our partners in Virginia are actually looking at territory size and how kind of the land, like the adjacent habitat across the landscape might impact that. So that research is fairly new and kind of ongoing. But they do seem to kind of have like favorite spots and favorite perches to hunt from. So I think generally most of them, depending on the habitat nearby, have like fairly small territories. And you know, if you're seeing a kestrel in the same spot all the time, it probably is the same kestrel over and over, or their mate. Yeah. Yeah.
You're an expert on the kestrels, but for the BGBI, are you monitoring all of this different species that you see in these areas?
Great question. Yeah, so I didn't really get into our other, the question was, through the Virginia Grassland Bird Initiative, are we monitoring other grassland species in addition to kestrel? I didn't really get into the other programs that we have through the Grassland Bird Initiative. We do have handouts too. Oh, I also want to mention, just so I don't forget, hot off the presses, we just created a Meet Your Grassland Birds book, which is really cool and kind of highlights some of the grassland bird species and how to identify them. We have English and Spanish, so please help yourself before you leave. But so through some of our other programs, we are doing a lot of promotion of land management techniques and best management practices for our ground nesting grassland birds in particular. We have our own in-house financial incentives program where we will actually pay farmers that will implement best management practices that protect nesting grassland birds. So that is delayed haying. They cannot cut hay until July 1st or later. And then summer pasture stockpiling, which is a form of rotational grazing. So cattle are removed from the select fields that they have enrolled in the program from April 15th to July 1st, which is what we consider the core nesting season in our region in Virginia. So I actually manage that program, and that takes up a lot of my life. And so we have had that incentives program launched in 2022. So this year will be the 4th year. In our past 3 years, we've had over 3,000 acres that have enrolled in the program, and an additional 3,000 acres that have participated voluntarily. So we didn't have to pay them the incentive, which we pay $35 an acre. In Virginia, we have also worked with the Natural Resources Conservation Service, the NRCS, which is a federal program of the USDA that offers cost share programs to farmers and landowners. So we worked with them to create a delayed haying cost share program in Virginia that basically mimics ours, except they pay better than we do. As well as they altered their dates for rotational grazing to more closely align with ours. So we kind of see our financial incentives program as like a, let's dip your toes into some conservation practices. It's a 1-year commitment. If it goes well, let's get you connected with some federal cost share money that will be about double what we're able to pay. But it is a bigger, you know, a longer term commitment for farmers. So we do a lot of that. Our partners at Smithsonian do a lot of grassland bird research, including looking for nests of like meadowlarks, bobolinks, grasshopper sparrows. And they have also been tagging with GPS tags, eastern meadowlarks and bobolinks, so that we can see when they fledge from the nest, where do they go? What kind of habitat do they prefer when they're newly fledged? How, you know, do they stay in our meadowlarks? Do they stay in this area in the winter, or do they leave? Because we do have meadowlarks year round, but we haven't really known, are they the same meadowlarks year round or not? So we do some research related to that as well. And then a lot of kind of public outreach like this, kind of promoting different best management practices, you know, like installation of riparian buffers and livestock exclusion fencing and things like that. Yeah.
How many people do you have altogether with, you know, paid people and volunteers? How many, you must need a lot, 500
Yeah.
different places. And also, where do you get most of your funding? Is it contributions, or it must be
Yeah.
subsidized by?
The questions were, how many people do we have on staff and volunteers that work with us on the Nest Box program? And where do we get our funding from? So for the Nest Box program specifically, well, the Grassland Bird Initiative, we have 7 staff. We generally consider 4 of us to be field staff that are kind of going out and meeting with landowners on a regular basis through the Grassland Bird Initiative. But we also work with several partner organizations in our area that also do some Kestrel box monitoring. And our volunteer base for this project is growing quickly. We actually just had a team meeting this afternoon, and there were 9 or 10 of us on the meeting that are, well, it was mostly paid staff and a couple of volunteers who are deeply involved in this program. But we've been actually just starting to work with our master naturalists in our region to get them trained in how to monitor boxes. So I think we'll be working with about a dozen or so master naturalists this year to help us kind of cover some of the territory that we are not able to cover with our staff. And then our funding for this program specifically, we have had some funding from the Northern Piedmont Community Foundation, which has funded our projects of having high schools build boxes for us. And then PEC is mostly funded through private donations, as well as grants. And then kind of all of our nonprofits in the initiative kind of have their own sources of funding, but PEC is mostly funded through private donations and a little bit through grants that funds salary of our field staff. So yeah. Were there any questions on Zoom?
No question
Okay.
on that.
Yeah.
How big are the kestrel eggs compared to a walnut, say?
A walnut. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, the question was how big are kestrel eggs? I mean, I would actually say they're slightly smaller than a chicken egg. Compared to a wall, I mean, they're definitely smaller than like the black walnuts you see on the ground. They're slightly smaller, I would say, than like a chicken egg that you would get from the grocery store anyway, like the large size chicken eggs, yeah.
That's not really.
Okay.
Birds.
Uh-huh.
Are you will die or something? I haven't heard that one in years.
Yeah, great question. The question was about whippoorwill populations and not hearing them in recent years. What are those populations doing? So whippoorwills, I actually hear this from a lot of people. What happened to the whippoorwills? I think they have lost a lot of forest habitat. They're also ground nesting birds. They actually nest on the ground in the woods. And so I also think because they're insectivores, they eat a lot of insects. I think pesticides have probably had quite an impact on their populations as well. I have never specifically worked with or studied whippoorwills, but I hear from folks all the time that they, miss the sound of whippoorwills, and I've only heard them maybe in 3 places ever. So there is actually a new study that is just starting through Smithsonian in this region. I think you guys might have shared it. I think it's mostly in Virginia and West Virginia, where they are wanting landowners who know that they have whippoorwills on their properties to reach out so that they can trap them and tag them and try to figure out better what is going on with the whippoorwill population. Yeah. Anything else? Thank you so much for having me.
I'll say goodbye too. So good night, everybody. Oh,
And feel free to grab some hand up and our new books, please.
Yeah, so good night. Have a great night. See you April 17th, if not earlier.